Good Sunday morning. Great to be with you today. And we begin with the controversy over the detention center in Homestead, holding a growing number of teens, mostly from Central America, who cross the border by themselves. About 2,000 of those teens now are being held at the facility, which is run by a private contractor for the government. And now they're going to add another 1,200 beds. It looks like the kids are being held in a humane way. They're treated humanely, but essentially it's a jail, and a very expensive one. It costs $750 a day for each teenager in custody. Might be cheaper to put them up at the Ritz-Carlton. Protesters stand outside that shelter daily, demanding that it be closed and that the teens be freed, sent to family members or sponsors. Echoing that call, most South Florida lawmakers, including the Democrat who represents that district, Debbie Mucarsel-Powell. And that is where we begin our conversation with her this week. Congresswoman, thanks so much for being here this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. We're glad you're here. All right. The detention center down in Homestead is in your district. It has now about 2,000 young unaccompanied minors cross the border by themselves. It's going to ramp up to more than 3,000 of these kids down there, ages 13 to 17. Are you concerned about that?
Michael, this has been the darkest cloud, I think, that's weighing heavily on me because it is in my community, in my district. In a city that should be thriving, and it is thriving, Homestead. And I had a meeting with some of the Homestead officials, and they were never consulted when they reopened that facility in Homestead. Nobody in Homestead wants to have that detention facility. I wanted to start with that. But as you know, and Glenna was there the day that I toured the Homestead facility detention center, there are over 1,600 kids that are being held. It feels like, for me, it felt like a prison. They're fed, they have beds, but they can only speak with family members twice a week for 5 minutes. Yeah. And some of them have been there for months with no real hope for reunification anytime soon. So when I saw that announcement, it was definitely demoralizing, and I'm very frustrated, and I'm going to be asking very tough questions from this administration.
So the essential question about that detention facility, and we've spent a lot of time there. There are people who spend a lot of their own lives standing vigil outside. And I thought so much about this, and I think the essential question is, here is such a vulnerable population of migrants without family. What is the best case scenario for that number of people who are in government custody, responsibility, to care for them, to make them happy, the least restrictive as they go through the process? What else can you do? If not this, then what? That's the question.
It's a very good question. And we had a hearing on family separation a few weeks ago in the Judiciary Committee, which I'm a part of. And the level of incompetence is very serious because a lot of the agencies,
what's
happening...
Homeland Security or Office of Refugee Resettlement?
We had ORR,
yeah.
We had Department of Health and Human Services, we had ICE, we had Border Patrol, and there's definitely a lot of miscommunication. They were ordered to separate kids at the border. We also see a lot of unaccompanied children come without family members, which is what you're referring to.
Instead, they're unaccompanied. Those aren't separated children anymore. There were some there.
I'm going to challenge you on that because when I was
there
in February,
that information?
I spoke with one young girl specifically when I was there.
Yeah.
And I asked her, how long have you been here? She told me 9 months. And I said, what happened when, and she said, well, my mother and I were separated at the border.
That goes to the miscommunication.
Exactly. And her mother has been deported, and all she wants is to be with her mom. She doesn't want to be in this detention facility. So part of the problem is that there's not a lot of communication, there's a lot of incompetence, and they've hired this company, a for-profit company, to manage this detention facility. Right. They're charging about $750 per child to be held there.
Per day.
There's not an incentive, Michael.
Yeah.
When I see the request for more beds, for 1,000 more beds, what message are we sending in this country? What are we doing?
So again, they have a process that they're going through. There are, to your point, there are kids who I've been told have been there 100 days because this list of numbers and phone numbers and sponsors that they're coming to be with don't don't check out. There are people who leave in 2 days because they do. So this process of finding appropriate and safe sheltering for these children, which is really where they should go, how do we get there? Is it more immigration judges? Is it more caseworkers? What is the answer of getting them to the place in those kind of numbers where they can be safe and secure in this process?
So it's all of that. But just to correct the record one more time, when I was there, I realized and I learned that case managers that are following the kids and the reunification process are not able to speak with the immigration attorneys that are representing the kids. So I would love for us to have a more, I know, I am not making this up. You should talk to immigration attorneys that are working in the center. And part of the problem is that there's no communication. We don't have enough immigration attorneys that are representing these kids. There are parts of the process that don't make sense to me. There's a young man, he must be 14, 15, that I spoke with, and then I later asked the immigration attorney. His father is living in California. He has been going through the process of reunification, and apparently his fingerprints expired, and so he was asked to start the process again. So whatever is going on, whether it's investing in more case managers, allowing them to work closely with immigration attorneys, investing in more resources for immigration judges, we need to do it.
And are you, as a congresswoman, you know, we talked before the show, you're in the thought process of what can we do in Congress? What can you do? There is this letter from DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. I'm not sure whether you saw that letter yet, but it was essentially, you know, putting up the red flags. We have a system-wide meltdown. The numbers are overwhelming. We need more congressional funding and resources. It sounds like she's speaking to the choir.
Exactly. And I want to remind the Secretary that we actually appropriated over $200 million to go directly to Border Patrol after the shutdown. That was part of our appropriations process. We have asked for funding to support the shelters so that we don't just hold immigrants in shelters without any form of healthcare services or appropriate lodging, so that we actually provide them with humane care. So we have appropriated those funds. And you know, instead of talking about, what was it? I'm forgetting the figure now, $5 billion for a wall, we need to appropriate funding. I support her request for Border Patrol agencies to be funded. We do support funding for these shelters to be able to take on the influx of immigrants. Immigration is a serious problem, but I have to tell you that the way that they're being processed is also a serious concern of mine. And we have to have the conversation of immigration reform.
Yeah.
Congresswoman, the letter that Glenna referred to that DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen sent also talked about the possibility of deporting these unaccompanied minors who cannot prove that they have a legal right to stay in the U.S. Well, that's a high bar to reach, because they have very few rights to stay in the U.S.
Part of the problem has been that we are not allowing the process of asylum and refugee requests. And that's where you see the backlog. That's where you see this critical number going up, you know, every day, as we're seeing in the border. I have to tell you that one of the things that I wanted to understand is, where are we with the level of immigration coming to our southern border? Because I keep hearing from, you know, the president, Secretary Nielsen, we have a crisis. We do have a problem of immigration. I will not deny that, but it's not a crisis. They have created this crisis by not processing the asylum requests.
100,000 people this month are going to try to cross into the United States. That's as high as it's been in a decade. That's a lot of people coming into the country.
It is. And I have to also tell you that just this week we were talking with the ambassador from Mexico on how we can help Mexico alleviate this problem, how we can help the Southern Triangle alleviate the problem. It's not taking funding away from those countries.
Yeah.
These people are desperate. They're fleeing violence, poverty. I'm not saying we should, you know, open our doors, welcome everyone. Obviously, that's not my position. Obviously, we have to have a secure border. But there are so many ways to deal with this issue. Not allowing anyone to be processed is not the answer.
So the metering that they're implementing now, at least in Tijuana, is not a good idea. I mean, if they have thousands of these migrants waiting in Tijuana, if you process 75, 100 a day, you're never going to allow these people to come in.
No, exactly. And one of the conversations that the Mexican ambassador mentioned to me is that they were talking to the United States that they would take a certain number of immigrants to some of their shelters, that they can't take them all, and that they also have an asylum request process, but that they're not getting the number of immigrants that they expected from the United States. So something is happening there. There's, again, miscommunication.
All right. Well, hold your thoughts. We have a lot more to talk about with you.